Welcome to That 30 Show, a podcast where we talk about the good, the bad, and the surprising parts of our 30s. I'm G, and I'm finally 30. I'm excited to find out if 30 really is the new 20, because if it is, then the best years are yet to come.
And I'm David. I'm entering my mid-30s. I used to have no back pain or trouble sleeping, but now I live off a healthy diet of self-help books and dream of being in bed by 10 p.m. every night. Join us each week as we try to figure out together what life in your 30s is all about. Welcome back to That 30 Show. G. Right. Yeah, that's right. G's on vacation. She left me all by myself. Sorry, folks. It's just me this week, and I'll be completely honest. I'm recording after being sick for more than a week. In fact, I'm still sick. I don't know if you can tell. My nose is a little stuffy, bit of a cough. So hopefully, you'll bear with me if I sound a little nasally. So I've been thinking for a few weeks now what I want to talk about with everyone here, just by myself, and thinking about sort of like That 30 Show and what has had the greatest impact on me as a 33-year-old turning 34 this year really is this idea of what I have been telling a lot of my friends about, which is that I feel like I've been on a bit of like this hippie, spiritual, personal wellness journey for the past 5 years. And it's something that has led me to a point in my life now where I feel very passionate about healthy lifestyles and living a healthy but also grateful life, and what it means to be happy, or more particularly, not just happy, because happiness is fleeting, but creating a more peaceful and content life. I think peacefulness is a lot more sustainable than happiness, because peacefulness can be sustained regardless of circumstances, whereas happiness, you're not going to be happy if you just got in a car crash. You're not going to be happy if you just find out you have, a chronic disease. And so I thought I'd tell all of you a little bit about my personal journey and something that has had a huge positive impact on me developing as a person, and some of the things that I've learned along the way that have helped me, I think, thrive in my 30s. So this story actually starts off in a bit of a familiar territory if any of you listened to the Deep Questions Put on the Spot episode where Olivia interviewed G and I. It starts with this freaking concussion. When I got back from that stupid ass bachelor party where we went to Six Flags for 3 days in a row, if you're not sure what I'm talking about, riveting details can be heard in episode 8. But when I got back from that trip, I realized that I had started feeling this very intense heaviness in my head, and I wasn't sure what was going on. And long story short, after a misdiagnosis from a walk-in clinic doctor, it got to a point where after several weeks, it was just undeniable that I had a concussion. Like, I didn't need a doctor to tell me at that point that I had a concussion. And I don't know if any of you have had a concussion. Mine was very minor. Okay, like I just bumped my head on a very rocky roller coaster ride, which I know it's very lame, but that's my story. But the best way I can describe the feeling of having a concussion was that when the symptoms were there, and that's the thing, the symptoms kind of come and go, and if you manage your environment and the stimulus that you put your brain under, you can sort of manage your concussion symptoms. When the symptoms are there, it feels like there's a giant, very, very tight elastic band around my head, around my forehead, like how you would wear a headband. That ring around my forehead and above my ears to the back of my head. It's as if someone is squeezing my head, and there's so much pressure to it, and everything is tight and everything is heavy. And it's just the most uncomfortable feeling that you can have, and it affects your ability to focus, to think, and it just feels tired. Like your brain feels tired. At one point in my concussion recovery journey, I was seeing a physio who specializes in concussion recovery. I can't remember. I saw a lot of specialists at one point, but one of the specialists I was seeing helped me understand what was going on in my brain a lot better. They explain it as your brain, because of the injury, it still has the ability to do everything it normally can. So for example, you can still do math, you can still ride a bike, you can still drive a car, your brain still knows how to do it. But how it gets from A to B has suddenly become a lot more complicated. The neural pathways are jumbled up. And so even though it can still get from A to B, it takes a very long-winded and non-linear path to get there. So that by the time it gets to the destination, your brain is so tired. Because normally, let's say you get up and you go for a 10-minute walk. This is such a basic process that your brain is very used to. And under the concussion situation, it can still get there, but it just takes so much more mental energy for the brain to accomplish the same thing. So I wanted to explain a little bit about how it felt and how debilitating it felt. And you're supposed to slowly train the brain back up and, you sort of push its limits, right? You do a little bit more, and based on how your symptoms react, you pull back, you pause. But you do get these occasions where you will feel those symptoms and you gotta stop. So what that meant for my life at that point was that I felt most of my symptoms most acutely when I was doing any sort of socializing or in a noisy environment. So one of the worst places to be would be in a noisy restaurant catching up with friends. And after like 10 minutes maybe, or like 20 minutes, I would feel my brain is on fire. And I would have to like leave the restaurant and go sit in my car and let my brain sort of cool down as I close my eyes. Or I remember, I'm hanging with friends at a house party and I would literally just excuse myself every 20 minutes to go hide in the washroom or in the bedroom in the dark and let my brain cool down. And to have these limits on your cognitive ability on a day-to-day level is so draining emotionally and mentally. And it forced me to completely reimagine what I was able to do and what I'm capable of doing. And this is the key point. This is the first key point that I want to share. What really started my journey here is this reckoning with my ineptitude, my inability, because a big part of my self-identity to this day, I'm trying to change it. And I started trying to change it, 5 years ago with the concussion, but it's a work in progress. But a big part of my identity is feeling like I'm someone who is generally able to do things. AKA, I feel like I take a lot of pride in being a competent person, whatever the hell that means. Okay. And all my life, especially in childhood, I was rewarded with praise and positive feedback as a result of my typically positive results in school, in extracurriculars, and in most things I did. I was lucky that in many of the endeavors that I took on, I was able to accomplish pretty positive results with minimal effort. And while that may sound like a good thing, as a result of that, I started to develop a self-identity of, I am smart, I am capable, because all these adults are praising me for being smart and being capable. And this is really the root of my struggle with perfectionism. Because once my identity became, I'm a smart person, well, then anything that happened that would potentially threaten that image would have to be avoided at all costs. Because God forbid, if I fail on something, it's not just like, even if, let's say, I try to ride a unicycle. Okay, I don't know, that's the first example that came to my mind. Let's say I try to ride a unicycle and I fail after like half an hour. Like, who would care about that? But if I were to do that, it wouldn't just be so much, I failed at riding a unicycle, ha ha ha. No, it would actually probably threaten my self-image of myself and made me question like, well, if I'm not a quick learner, then who am I? And so in order to protect my self-image, I have shied away from doing anything that I feel would have a low probability of success. And if most of you are listening who have at least some life experience, you will know that that sort of mentality is the most absurd and most counterproductive self-sabotaging mindset to have. So going back to my concussion now, even if I played a board game, one of those board as simple as like Game of Life, okay, or as simple as Snakes and Ladders even, I don't know, just even if I was playing a board game like that, I remember 20 minutes in, I would have the biggest headache. And the concussion and the elastic band around my head and the brain feeling like it's on fire. And it was such a sobering situation to be in. To be relegated to this person who is completely incapable of doing the most basic tasks. Like, part of my recovery as prescribed by my physiotherapist and my doctors were to go on like 20-minute walks where I have to monitor my heart rate and make sure it doesn't go above like 130 or something like that. And so being in such a vulnerable and handicapped situation forced me to come to terms with a new way of living. And this is a long-term sort of situation because my whole concussion recovery took me around 2 years. And so while there are maybe weeks or months when I was improving, there are certainly then weeks and months when I felt like I was not improving. And so there was literally no end in sight. There was no guarantee that my concussion symptoms would be healed. They were like, it could last for another 10 years. It probably won't, but it could. It could go away next week. And I think that's the hard part, right? Imagine you have some sort of recovery from an accident. And then they're like, hey, you know what? You're going to be in a wheelchair for 6 months, but 99.9% chance that if you follow your rehab routine, you're going to be out of your wheelchair after 6 months. Those 6 months are probably going to be pretty hard, but at least you have an end goal in sight. But with my concussion, I don't know, like whether I stuck with this for the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. It was very emotionally and mentally discouraging. Speaking of my low points, about half a year, I think, or so after my concussion recovery was still ongoing, I experienced a breakup. And I mean, I don't need to explain that. That's devastating, obviously, no matter sort of the circumstances of it. That partner I had at that time was basically who I was talking to for like maybe 95% of the time. After the relationship ended, I found myself in such a dark, lonely, and difficult place because a lot of friends, they knew that I couldn't be on my phone or screen very much because it would trigger my symptoms. And so I think out of consideration, like most people stopped messaging me altogether. I remember there would be days that go by where I would not receive a single text message. And I don't know about you, but that's pretty fucking sad. I would felt like if I just, something happened and I die, like how long would it take for someone to know? But during those few months when I'm trying to recover from a breakup, as well as what felt like worsening concussion symptoms and isolation from social connections, I don't know if I was clinically depressed, but it certainly got pretty close to that point. And in preparation for this episode today, I sort of tried to dig up an email I remember sending to my work one day. And so here it is. I sent this email at 2:13 a.m. and I sent it to my supervisor. And I said, I have a lot I want to share, but not in a good place right now, so this may be a bit rambly. I laid in bed for the past hour-ish, debating whether I can call in sick tomorrow, and I decided I really need to. I recognize everyone else is also super busy and overwhelmed, but just speaking personally, I'm beyond stressed. A few hours ago, I just had what I'm pretty sure is an anxiety attack. I felt like I was going to faint. My heart was beating really fast. My hands got sweaty. I started shivering and trembling. I felt really hot and then really cold. I've experienced this multiple times in the past year, but first time in a while. It's usually when I have negative health symptoms and it escalates into an anxiety attack because I think I might be able to pass out or have a heart attack or something. I go on in the email to talk about some work-related details about how it's been very busy at work. I try to pace myself, but there's a lot of meetings sort of on the horizon for the next day. And it's giving me a lot of pressure and anxiety because of my health and not sure how I'm going to hold up with the work things. And then the email continues to say, I don't have a point. I just want to share what's going through my head. Work is overwhelming and busy, even if I were at 100%, much less in this current state where my brain is completely malfunctioning. It's honestly so stressful, and I am and always have been very mentally strong. And if I'm frank, I don't like when people play the mental health card, but if I'm being very honest with you and with myself, I think I'm at a breaking point. With my anxiety attack, I'm wrestling with whether I'm fighting depression, given how bloody difficult this concussion recovery has been for me emotionally, mentally, psychologically. I actually think I want to see some sort of counselor. I think I have a lot I suppress and try to fight through, as you can tell by this email. I hope I can get more time off because honestly, I wish I could just take time off work completely for a few weeks. The only reason I'm not is because I don't have permission to do so. This concussion thing is a lot to deal with on its own without any added work. I know you are super busy. I'm so sorry. Don't feel bad for me. It's just important you are aware. I know you care and would do everything in my best interest. And so it was rough. My employer is very kind and has very generous HR policy. So I was able to get a few weeks off work, paid, and have a gradual return to work plan. And then I started after that point being connected with, a physiotherapist that specializes in concussions. So I was connected with a counselor. I was connected with a return to work HR sort of specialist at my company. And I've just never been someone who's really good at asking for help. I just always figured my shit out myself. So that was my rock bottom. So where does it go up from here? One of the main things I remember doing as a turning point in my concussion recovery is there were moments when I would be in the washroom. I'd be looking at myself in the mirror and I would literally be talking to myself out loud. And one of the things I remember saying is, David, this is not how your story ends. This is not the end. This is not the rest of your life. And I had to tell myself that, right? Because it felt so hopeless. As I explained earlier, there's no end in sight. And I had to tell myself, this is not it. You're going to be okay. You don't know when. And so I had to do positive self-talk. And I think starting to do that, it helped. And I was so lonely, as I mentioned earlier, right? I wasn't talking to anyone, no one to talk to. I was going over a breakup. And another thing I did as part of my journey to recover, in addition to starting to see the specialist and getting professional help, was at one point, I started writing in my diary, which is not something I do, but I started writing in my diary, and this is what I said. Monday, November 19, 2018. I'm going to try this. My track record of developing positive habits is spotty at best, but let's give this a shot. Not a daily diary, just every day when I can. Why? Because life hasn't been this low, lonely, and challenging since those dark years in high school. Let's use each entry to touch upon a few things. Highlight, something I'm grateful for or happy about, an accomplishment, and something I'm looking forward to. The idea is that these would be bite-sized entries, hopefully taking just 15 minutes or so to write, so as not to deter me from the exercise. Here goes. So for a while here, I would have an entry, and oftentimes I would be writing at the end of the day after having talked to no one in my life, and it was very lonely and I was very sad, and I would have to force myself to ask myself, okay, what was a highlight today? What is something I'm grateful for? What is something I accomplished? And what is something I look forward to? But let me give you a taste of what some of these highlights and accomplishments were that I wrote down. On one of the days, I said under grateful/happy, I said, I'm grateful I have a dry, warm home to return to after taking an evening stroll in the rain. Another day, I said, I'm grateful for that I have the disposable income to buy groceries to my heart's content. In terms of an accomplishment, one day I wrote, I ate yogurt and fruits after dinner today, trying to cultivate a new habit to do so each night. Another day, under look forward to, I wrote down, I look forward to hopefully having time to do my laundry tomorrow. So hopefully that gives a sense of, I guess, the straws that I was sort of grasping for. But the point here is not that it's very pitiful. The point here is that when you focus on the little things, you'll find that there's always something to be grateful for, always something that you can look forward to, always something that you have accomplished. And it's so easy for us, because of our monkey brains, we're so good biologically, naturally, to focus on what might go wrong, the negative stuff, and worrying about the future, because the same brain who did not do that, 10,000 years ago would be the Homo sapien that would die. So while that worrying and the negativity and the focus on and remembering just the bad things, it has provided huge evolutionary benefit to us. In the modern day, when we're pretty safe physically, it just wreaks havoc on our mental health and our emotions. And so this focus on positive self-talk, telling myself this is not how it ends, and writing these diary entries is the transition to the biggest aspect that has helped me develop as a person, conquer the concussion situation, and thrive in my 30s, which is mindset. I almost feel like over these past years, having sort of read more about this idea of the power of your mind, I'm not the only one. I'm sure many of you are familiar with some of the things I'll talk about here, but I honestly feel like I feel like I've tapped into a secret superpower. That's how life-changing I feel it has been. Understanding how powerful my mindset can be to respond to life. And it's so empowering. It's so empowering. Because the thing with the concussion recovery, right? It's like you feel like you are a passenger in your own story. You are at the mercy of your concussion symptoms, which have no end in sight. And it's not hard to feel like a victim in that situation, like you are powerless. But as I've explained with my self-talk and with my diary, I started to discover how much of a difference I can make in my life just with my mind, regardless of my life circumstances. Sorry, I'm not trying to go all like Professor Xavier on you guys, but just bear with me a little bit. There was a book that my friend recommended I read at one point when we weren't even sure if I had a concussion or not. My friend, who's a nurse, was saying, hey, maybe you're just stressed. And I recently read this book on meditation that kind of interested me and helped me. So maybe you should give it a shot. And so the book is called 10% Happier by a former journalist called Dan Harris. Dan Harris infamously suffered a panic attack on live television and was a huge skeptic of the merits and efficacy of mindfulness practice and mindfulness meditation. But through exploring these ideas as a journalist, he was converted from skeptic to now, a bona fide meditation guru. So that book introduced me to the concept of mindfulness meditation. And G and I have talked about this a little bit in the past, but let me just summarize why meditation is so powerful. Mindfulness meditation, when done right, is literally just exercising your ability to control your attention. Imagine your attention is a flashlight, and one who does not have much control or does not have much mindfulness has no control over this flashlight. This flashlight is like a hyperactive child who is distracted by and interested in every little thing that might cross his mind or his vision. And it'll focus on one thing and it'll quickly flick over to something else. And the flashlight is just going everywhere. It's like almost like a disco and it's out of control. When you practice mindfulness meditation and you keep bringing your attention back to your breath or something like that, you are training your ability to A, be mindful of your flashlight, and B, actively exercise the mental muscle to move that flashlight to where you want to move it to. And the idea is that the more you practice doing this, the more you're able to do it in those moments of stress and emotion. That when you're having a fight with your partner, when you're stuck in a traffic jam, and you're feeling very emotional about it, you can in that moment have a greater capacity to bring that flashlight to something that is useful. What's not useful? Anger, impatience, hatred. And what may be useful is gratitude, counting your blessings, whatever. And this brings me to a few quotes. The first of a few quotes I want to mention today by Viktor Frankl, the famous author of Man's Search for Meaning. He's a Holocaust survivor. I haven't actually read that book, but I really should. But Viktor Frankl's quote is, "Between stimulus and response lies a space. In that space lie our freedom and power to choose a response. And in our response lies our growth and our happiness." And so it's this idea that when something happens, our response may feel automatic, may feel out of our control, may feel instantaneous. But with enough practice and mindfulness, we can actually be mindfully control what our response is. So for example, someone cuts you off in traffic. Your response is anger and like, what the hell? Why are you so entitled? What gives you the rights? Why are you so much better than everyone else? Why can't you just line up like everyone else? These are all thoughts speaking from personal experience. But that response is not automatically attached to the stimulus of someone cutting you off. For example, you can choose, if you have the ability in that moment, to be like, ooh, someone cut you off, stimulus. Okay. Wow, this person, it's very possible that they are rushing their pregnant wife to the hospital to give birth. It is possible their grandparents dialed an emergency number saying that they're about to faint and they're the only one who knows. And they call 911, but obviously they still want to get home. Like, we don't know, and it's probably not true, but it is possible it's true. So why don't we choose that interpretation instead? This idea that there's a stimulus and there's a response, and that we can choose a response, brings me to a second quote actually that I really, really like, which is from Shakespeare. There is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. I love this quote. Because it's always like this. It's humans ascribing meaning to something that does not objectively, inherently, intrinsically have any meaning. For example, someone's late. You think they're rude. You think they're being irresponsible. You think it messes up your whole dinner plan. The event, the objective fact here is this person arrived 5 minutes later than they said they would. That's the objective event that happened. Whether it's a good thing or bad thing is entirely our decision. It is possible that there's an alternate universe where it is impolite to be on time. And in that universe, this person being quote unquote late, you would respond very positively. And so when I started to grapple and be exposed to some of these mindset ideas, I felt like I unlocked the potential to find peace and happiness, hopefully, no matter what happens. And isn't that so cool? It's like, it doesn't matter what happens in life, but if I practice enough mindfulness and enough gratitude, I can always be peaceful. I can always be grateful. I can always be content. And I'm no longer at the mercy of things that are outside my control, right? If something happens at work, if my boss does something, or if my friend says something, I don't have to let that affect me anymore. Because I realize, hey, you know what? I could choose differently. I'm not saying it's easy. In fact, it's bloody hard. And I would say I fail 95% of the time to in terms of choosing the less emotional response. But this understanding of mindset, of perspective, has been transformative for me in these past few years. Really transformative. If you are interested in exploring this, there's obviously no end of books and stuff that could be really strong recommendations. But I'll just share some that has had a outsized impact on me, if it all interests you. So first is a book I read, a memoir called The Choice, Embrace the Possible. And it's written by Dr. Edith Eger, or Eger, E-G-E-R, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. And it is actually another Holocaust survivor. And the reason this book is among my all-time favorites and something I recommend everyone to read is because of how empowering her story is. Obviously, as you can probably imagine, as a Holocaust survivor, she went through more than any of us can possibly imagine. But in her book, she talks about how her mindset freed her to survive. She said, I think, I don't remember verbatim, obviously, but she says how the Nazis, they can take everything away from her, but they can't take away her thoughts. And one of the enduring messages that I love the most about The Choice is that pain is inevitable. Suffering is a choice. I freaking love that idea. And I love how Dr. Eger encourages everyone to not play the victim, to not relish victimhood, There is no power in it. And her story demonstrates so brilliantly why. The second book I want to recommend when it comes to mindset is called The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. This is a very, very famous book. It's written as a conversation. So a lot of the sort of doubts and skeptical remarks you might have about oh, what can you really choose your reaction and stuff like that? It addresses all those questions. I'll be reading this, right? And I'll be like, this is completely unrealistic. How does this work? And then the next part of this book, it'll be like, this is completely realistic. How would this work? And then the author answers that question. So I think it's done quite well. And the book is just a brilliant exploration of how the present moment is all you have. Nothing matters except right now. And then right now. And right now. Other than what is happening right now, everything else is just a projection of what might be, or an irrelevance, which is what has been. And not thinking of all I have to master is this present moment makes life a lot more manageable when it's very often overwhelming. And again, the book will talk about, well, what do you mean? I have to worry about the health of my parents. I have to worry about whether I'm going to make ends meet or whether I'm going to be able to put food on the table. It addresses all of that. Then there's Tom Bilyeu, which actually G recommended me. Tom Bilyeu is a lot of things, has a lot of things, but basically I engaged with Tom Bilyeu through his podcast. He was the one who really helped me crystallize this idea of identity, because his own story is one of changing his identity from being smart. He decided to change his identity to, I am the best learner in the world, right? So anytime someone pointed out for him that he was wrong, he would be like, well, this is amazing because now I have found the correct answer. I have learned something new that feeds my identity. And so with this new mindset, I think it really has helped him remove ego out of the equation. Okay, I'm going on for a little bit here, so let me just power through. There's Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. I've talked about this on the podcast before. Absolutely brilliant book in helping you understand your limits are limiting and not real limits. Obviously, with caveats, but as someone who is very, very good at finding excuses, I find that book so helpful. And then finally, I mentioned earlier this idea of control. Things being in your control, things being outside of control. So right alongside this mindset evolution, right, that I have been trying to adopt, right alongside that is my interest in Stoicism, as has been mass marketed essentially by Ryan Holiday. I think the first book I read of his is called Ego is the Enemy. Another really famous book by his is called The Obstacle is the Way. I love Stoicism because it has several central tenets, and I don't obviously remember all of them, but the ones that really resonate with me that I do remember is control what you can control. It's like that, the serenity prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Stoicism is all about this. Stoicism practices and teaches the idea that you have to identify what you can control and what you can't control. And spoiler alert, 99.9% of life you can't control, but what you always can control is, as you may have guessed, your mind, your mindsets. And so I love that. So I think I'm going to wrap it up there. Honestly, it's very uncomfortable and I feel very self-conscious to even do a solo episode because I feel like it can be very egotistical. But I wanted to share some of my thoughts, my stories, and some things that have really helped me because it has helped me so much. I'm still obviously a sorry work in progress, but if there is any progress I have made in the past few years, a huge part of it is my exposure to mindfulness, meditation, and Stoicism. And it all stemmed from my concussion when I couldn't let things outside my control define me. So hopefully, if that helps you thrive in your 30s, if anything I said helps you thrive in your 30s, that's great. I'm happy. Let me end on a very, very exciting note. And I feel a bit inappropriate to share this when G is not here. But a few days ago, our little show reached an amazing milestone. we hit 1,000 plays all time. Yay! I know if G were here, she would be very happy and very excited. And me being still very sick cannot really convey the sort of optimistic excitement that G can. But I just wanted to share that because I think, well, we are so grateful for every single person that has listened to this, whether we know you or even more importantly, if we don't. And I hope you will stick around. G will be back either next episode or the episode after, depending on how long she takes to recover from her vacation. And until then, remember folks, there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. Alright, take care everyone. Bye now.